Hello guys, today I would like to show you how to paint ghosts or any kind of ethereal spirit or anything like that. So if it's glowing and if it doesn't have any body, this technique should work for that. And the first obvious step is to use airbrush. If it's like the first video of mine that you are watching, all my painting is based around airbrushing, and I heavily use airbrush in almost all the cases, so all the techniques are based around the airbrush. It's not like just the additional extra step, it's like the axis of all my techniques, so every other step is based on that I'm starting with an airbrush. So yeah, if there is one thing I would like to achieve with my teaching and so my videos and my articles, is to make the airbrush more easy to use and more accessible for all the painters, because I think it saves so much time. Like anybody who actually want to paint his own army should buy a brush. I know I'm a little bit straightforward with that, and some people think it's like, I don't know, advertising, but I have no stakes in that. I'm just using airbrush all the time. I see the huge benefits from it, and I think the miniature painting, it's very tedious and slow process, so if there is something which can cut the time in half or even more, it's worth doing. Okay, so let's get back to the ghost. Usually when I start painting, I'm doing like the prime color from the top of the model. I'm spraying from above, and this is creating like the gradient from top down. But in this case, this ghost should glow from the inside, so I'm doing like the opposite. So I'm spraying from the bottom up, especially aiming at the inside of his cloak and his face. So yeah, this will be like the glowing part on the model. I will cover some of that turquoise color in the next steps, but at the moment I would like to get like nice even blue or turquoise color on the inside of his cloak and on the blade, because it's like the another very glowing part. So yeah, and I'm doing like starting with like plain turquoise, and then I'm adding white. But there is one thing to remember: when you add white to any color, it's like a little bit dull with more the white you're adding. So at the end, it's good to make like another round of spraying with the color you were using at the beginning, because it's regain some of that color, and every paint and with a little bit of water, it's translucent, so it will be brighter, but you will still get this nice color you were using at the beginning. And if you are painting any kind of glowing part, you will almost always do too much of the color, and I wanted to cover some of that, just to leave like really the inside of the cloak and maybe a little ends of the tips of his cloak with this turquoise color, and cover everything else. So I just need to take very dark color like black, for example, and just spray from the top down, and it really covered most of these blue parts on his cloak, so it left only with like very tips at the bottom. So that's actually something I wanted to achieve at the beginning. But the whole process is like going back and forth, because I had like very vague idea what I want to achieve, and I didn't have like straightforward plan how to do it. So probably painting the next models would be much easier, because this was like the sample model, and I would like just to experiment with few ideas. And yeah, I think I got it right. But this technique is like, it depends very much on the model. Like I'm guessing all the wraiths from the Nighthounds will be similar, so the model with only the cloak. But when I decide to paint like the just regular skeleton warriors, it will be a little bit different. I will focus more on the insides of the like the skeletal structure, so like the eye holes, or between the space between the ribs, like the inside of the rib cage should glow, and the ribs should stay dark. And I'm guessing it will be a little bit harder to achieve with AIRBRUSH, but we will see. At the moment I'm doing the ghost guy, it's really much easier. Still, there is a little bit of skeleton on this model as well, so I will need to paint like this subtle glowing from between his bones. So there is some of the color already airbrushed, but the bones itself should be dark, so I wanted to start with covering some of this stuff that shouldn't be blue or turquoise at the moment. So that's the really first step, because when everything is blue it's hard to tell what's glowing and what's not. So I decided like the stick on his weapon should be dark, because the hands will be glowing, so I need some place to make this effect visible. And yeah, like most of his face should be dark, and only the eye holes and the mouth and the nose should be really blue and glowing. Other than that, we need like the contrast to showcase what's that the light is coming from the inside of skeleton. And when you are doing that, you want to have like fairly thin paint with a little bit of water, because you really don't want to have like the straight lines between the black parts and the glowing parts. There you'll need to create some kind of like the light distortion effect. So, and obviously the light doesn't end in the one spot and continues in another, it's like the gradient. So yeah, to achieve that you will need fairly amount of water in your paint, and probably more than one layer, especially on the like the very small parts like the face. On the stick it's much more easier to do. And after that you will need to take like plain white paint and highlight all the spots that are really glowing. So in the next steps you probably need to smooth it out a little bit, but at this exact moment you will need to do like showcase which part is glowing, and just to distinguish between these spots and everything else. And when you have that, you will need to mix a little bit of white and turquoise to make the color transition between white and the turquoise from the airbrush a little bit smoother. But really at the edges you can, in most cases I guess, you can leave the white as it is, but in the other areas that are not with really hard edge, you should smooth out the transition. So you will need to mix the white and the turquoise a little bit, or in some cases you can just go with like very watered down turquoise. I hope it makes sense. But the main idea is like the inside of the skeleton is glowing and everything else is very, very dark, just to make contrast between the two colors, like the dark cloak and the glowing inside of the skeleton. So I know I'm repeating myself, but when I'm painting his hands, I'm not highlighting like the bones itself, only the space between them. It's I don't know if it's clearly visible on the video, but yeah, it should be. And again, it's a similar case with hand brushing, like with airbrushing. When you have too much white, you will lose like the nice turquoise color you had at the beginning. So when you decide there is too bright or too much white, you will need to take like the first color, like the base color, the turquoise, and do like glazes over the white space that you want to tone down a little bit, and you should get more of the color without losing the brightness of whole piece. But yeah, it's a little bit going back and forth, and when you decide the model looks okay, you should stop. When you are painting the glowing blade, there are two details you want to keep in mind. So the edges are very important, and the edges should be very bright. And the other thing is, like, you want smooth gradient of the color. It can be any color, and like very concentrate white spot in the middle. So airbrush is perfect for that, but you won't make like the one glowing spot in the middle with airbrush, so you really need to take the hand brush and like accumulate the white paint in the glowing spot. So yeah, it's much easier to do with hand brush. It is like one of the not so many things you cannot do with airbrushing. yeah, so at this point I had like 90% of the model done, but I still need to do something with the cloak. So I wanted to start with like basic edge highlights at all the edges on the cloak, but after that I decide it's too harsh. The color transition is like, it's good on the edges, but when I start to do the same thing like on the flat surface at the top of his back, it will be too harsh. So I decide to do just a little bit of airbrushing, and it did like the two things. It did like the smooth highlight on the flat surface on his back, and in the same time it a little bit smooth out every edge highlighting I did before. So I really like combine hand brushing and airbrushing almost in the same time. So sometimes I do like very strong highlights in one spot and just use the airbrush to smooth it out. It's much more efficient than doing like the smooth color transition with hand brush alone, but obviously it's not doable on all pieces because sometimes you will spray over something you don't want to spray, and it screw up your paint job. But in this case, the back is really different from everything else, and it's easy to access with airbrush. So I knew I won't spray over the blue because it was just inside the cloak, so I could easily use the airbrush. And I really recommend you to do similar thing, but if you decide to try it, you should go with very diluted paint. So even if you cover something you did before with this airbrushing, the paint is translucent enough to only cover a little bit of the paint job you did before. So it's much harder to screw up. So if you decide to experiment with it, just dilute your paint more than usual. I hope I don't rambling too much. I feel like I do, but we just stick with that. And when you have all of that, the last thing you need is to like the final touches with the plain white. Every spot that is like on the top or in the most visible place should be highlighted with plain white. It's like the very end of the road. So yeah, if you decide that you want to have to like highlight some of the details, you should definitely aim at doing it with white. And yeah, that's all. I hope I will do more of that stuff, and if you decide to use any of that, just send me the pictures. I would be very happy to receive any of your work. And if you want to explore more of my stuff, the links are in the description box. So yeah, I hope you like it, and see you in the next video. Cheers!